Hello, my name is Lee Presser. This is my show. I speak frequently to very interesting people. Some of these conversations are so exciting, so intellectually stimulating, I thought others might like to listen in. This is the reason we started recording Conversation with Lee Presser.
Welcome to Conversation with Lee Presser. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch is the major citywide newspaper in St. Louis, Missouri. The Post is read as far west as Kansas City, Missouri, as far south as Memphis, Tennessee, and as far north as Springfield, Illinois. Joseph Pulitzer created the Post-Dispatch when he purchased and merged the St. Louis Westliche Post, a German-American newspaper, and the St. Louis Dispatch in December 1878. Its first edition of 4,020 copies contained only 4 pages. In the mid-20th century, the St. Louis Post-Dispatch had the second largest news bureau of any newspaper in the Midwest. In 2005, the Post-Dispatch was sold to Lee Enterprises of Davenport, Iowa for $1.46 billion. As of September 2011, daily circulation was 191,631, and the Sunday circulation was 332,825. Our guest today is the new editorial page editor, Tony Messenger. Mr. Messenger has been serving as an editorial writer since March 2011 and was promoted in July 2012. Tony Messenger, welcome to Conversation.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
So let's start with the basics. What is an editorial page editor, and what is the purpose of the editorial page of a major daily newspaper?
The primary role of the editorial page is to sort of spark conversation in the community, move the community forward, and be the opinion vehicle for the newspaper. What's unique about what we do on editorial pages compared to some of the other media is we have a board of contributors, a board of writers that meet every day and talk about the issues of the day and come to consensus on what our opinion is, what the opinion of the newspaper is. Historically, you go back to 1878, mentioning Joseph Pulitzer founding the newspaper. Historically, and still in some newspapers, the editorial opinion is the opinion of the publisher. Most daily newspapers today, it's the opinion of a board of people, generally led by the editorial page editor, that do something that is unique in American conversation these days. We meet, we come to consensus, we think about issues thoughtfully, we don't yell at each other, generally speaking, occasionally happens, and try to put forward opinions that represent, in our case, a very specific platform of ideas that come from Joseph Pulitzer himself.
Mm-hmm. I'm not asking for names, but who are these people that sit on the board?
Well, the current board consists of the publisher, Kevin Mowbray, the editor, Gilbert Bailon, myself, deputy editorial page editor, Kevin Horrigan, and Deb Peterson, one of our other editorial writers. For all practical purposes, there are 3 of us that meet every day. Kevin Horrigan, Deb Peterson, and myself. We're the primary writers of the editorials, and we hash out the issues of the day, and like everybody else, we start our day with the front page of the Post-Dispatch and look at the issues in the news. And we don't always write off of what's in our paper. We frequently write on other topics that we think are important, that may be local, may be national, may or may not have been in the news pages. We operate independently of the news pages. But it's the 3 of us that sort of start our day together and figure out where we're going to go.
Let's see, Mr. Bailon that you mentioned, he used to be
the editorial page editor, and now he's the editor of the paper. He replaced Arnie Robbins a couple of months ago.
And Lee Enterprises that I mentioned in the introduction, that's the owner of the company, do they have any input or influence in the editorial content?
On the editorial page, none whatsoever. Mm-hmm. And that's been consistent since I've been there. And ironically, people assume that the corporate boss has some sort of control over the opinions of the editorial page. I've worked at a couple of different newspapers that had large corporate bosses. haven't ever seen it happen. It's just sort of a misnomer that's out there.
Oh, yeah, but yet you said that originally it was the opinion.
Originally, it was the opinion of the publisher,
Joseph
Pulitzer.
And
there are some newspapers. I used to work for the Columbia Daily Tribune in Missouri, for instance, family-owned newspaper in which Hank Waters, the owner and publisher, still writes all of the editorials. So there are newspapers out there in which the publisher is very influential in terms of what the opinion is. Our tradition, and it's been this way for a very long time, is that the publisher doesn't particularly insert himself into the editorial board conversations. There's occasionally he will sit in on our meetings, but during my time here, the publisher's never directed us one way or another in terms of saying this is where we need to go. He's a strong believer in the fact that the independence of our editorial page in terms of determining what stances we're going to take is one of the values that the readers appreciate.
By way of education of the listeners, what is the role of a publisher as opposed to the role of an editor, as opposed to the role of the editorial page editor?
The publisher runs the business. He runs the whole thing, and our publisher, and I think most publishers today tend to be a little bit more focused on the business side. Our industry is going through some difficult times in terms of navigating the internet, navigating mobile sites, dealing with a tough economy, and so the publisher tends to be primarily focused on those things. But the editor, the circulation manager, the advertising manager, all of those sorts of people then report to the publisher, and he directs the entire operation. The editor is primarily involved on the news side. Although he is my boss, I report directly to him. So we do have conversations every day about what we're doing on the editorial page. But the editor's primary focus is everything that's going on news side, news, sports, features, everything that you see in print that journalists produce. And then my job is the editorial page and the op-ed page, leading our editorial staff, deciding what our opinions are going to be, writing many of those opinions, communicating with readers, bringing in outside opinions for the op-ed page, deciding which syndicated columns we're going to run, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. And syndicated columns, you have a lot, well, most newspapers do, but you have a lot of syndicated columns versus local opinions, I've noticed.
Right.
Is that, why is that? Why is it better to bring somebody in that is from far away as opposed to having more local voices?
It's a balance, and in fact, having just been in the job now for a little bit more than a month, I'm still trying to figure out what that proper balance is. But the syndicated columnists serve an important purpose. They are names that are known to most readers. They bring people to the opinion page because they want to know what George Will thinks. They want to know what Leonard Pitts thinks, what Dana Milbank thinks about the national political topic. A lot of our readers are very interested in politics and very interested in the national scene. And while we tend to focus our editorials a little bit more on local topics, our readers want to know, and they don't all have subscriptions to the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times or the Washington Post. And so it's important to have those voices. They draw people in and they inform them on the national debate. You know, on our page today, we had a couple of national voices, Kathleen Parker and Eugene Robinson, talking about Paul Ryan being named the vice presidential candidate to go with Mitt Romney.
Yes, I know, I have that right
and
here.
So, you know, I think those voices help bring a national perspective to you know, St. Louisans care about what's going on in the country and care about what's going on in the world, and our page is one of the avenues for them to be educated and entertained on those topics.
Mm-hmm. Before we go any further, I want to make sure people understand that the date today is August 14th, 2012. So because by the time they see this, or if they see it on YouTube, it's going to be sometime later. So if anything's changed, that's why. That's why this is August 14th.
Understandable.
There's been a fellow who sat in that very chair that you're sitting in right now, Tad Armstrong, who is a local attorney and also a leader in the education of the Constitution in the United States. He invented a club called ELL.
Right.
And he, for, I don't know, 2.5 years, 3 years, somewhere in that neighborhood, was allowed a spot in your newspaper once, I think once a month, wasn't it?
Yes.
And now he's not. And I just was asking, what's the story with that? I mean, here's a local voice that a lot of people wanted to hear from.
A couple of reasons. We made, as soon as I got my new job, I was informed we're cutting some expense. And there was some expense there to be cut. The other reason is, as I looked at the balance of our page in terms of conservatives, liberals, independents, voices that I thought people really needed to hear from, Tad's column just didn't provide anything to readers that they weren't already getting from either Colleen Campbell or another local writer who's also conservative like Tad is, or from some of our other people that write letters to the editor regularly or send columns in. And so I just decided that it was time to do something a little bit different on the page. I'm still in the process of deciding what our balance on the page is going to be, but Tad was let go in terms of his local column because of that.
So it was more about your rebalancing the paper as opposed to the expense. Because let's just say he said, "All right, don't pay me." I just
He did. He did.
Yeah.
You know,
don't pay me.
He said he wanted to keep doing it, and it was as much about the balance and what I thought was, you know, we have a conversation on the page sometimes about writers in which everybody has a good column in them. Everybody's got some story to tell somewhere. Not everybody has a good column in them every month. Not everybody has something different to say every month. And I don't want to be overly critical of Tad or anybody else, but when I looked at what he was writing about from month to month, I decided that there just wasn't enough value that was being brought to readers there, that one, we needed to be able to pay when I needed to cut some expense down, and two, I'm not a big fan of asking somebody to do something for free that I was paying for previously. Mm-hmm. It just doesn't feel right to me to do that.
So now we get into the controversial part. There are a number of people who look at the Post-Dispatch. Well, first of all, I want you to know I read the Post-Dispatch.
That's great.
I already had my post out this morning and tore it apart, and and I actually do tear it apart and date stuff, put it away, file it away, things that I find important. And when I turn to folks that I know and I say, "Well, did you see this in the Post?" "No." "Did you see that?" "No." "No, we don't get the Post. We don't want to hear from the Post-Dispatch," some of them say, because they say that they feel the paper is so tilted in one political direction that they find it unsatisfying or worse. I'd like you just to address that issue of why would a large number of people who are in the community feel that way?
I think part of that is a misnomer. I think part of that is it becomes part of the story, part of the narrative that's out there, and it's not necessarily true. While it is true that we tend to endorse, when it comes to endorsement time, more Democrats than Republicans, I think a regular reader of our editorial page, if you look at it on a regular basis, sees us hold Democratic politicians to a high standard as well. We have been significantly critical at various times of Governor Jay Nixon on the Missouri side, for instance. Governor Blagojevich, former Governor Blagojevich.
What's the criticize there?
Yeah, I mean, not that that's exactly difficult. Of local Democratic politicians when they make mistakes, etc. On the editorial page...
Pause there for a second. I noticed that in the Clay Carnahan, that you folks came down on the Carnahan side and made some really important points about Congressman Clay, who has been a guest here. We've talked to him. But I found it startling that he just was proud as heck that he sold his vote to Nancy Pelosi when she was running for Speaker for $5 million.
I think that's one of the things that made us uncomfortable about endorsing Clay. And anybody who read that editorial knows that the Carnahans weren't very happy with it either. It's not like it was, it was not a very glowing endorsement of Russ Carnahan. But to me, that's the key to the editorial page. And that endorsement editorial is an important one as it relates to at least what my philosophy is. We're not a part of any party apparatus. We're not a part of the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. In my personal case, I've never been a member of either party. I grew up in Colorado. I'm a political independent, and there are still some of us around. And so that endorsement editorial was significant to say, hey, this is not about party politics. Look at the flaws that these two candidates have. The theme of that editorial was St. Louis ought to be able to do better than this. Mm-hmm. We wanted to see a better candidate, but these are the two candidates we have, and based on their flaws, we thought that Russ Carnahan was the least flawed. Obviously, he got beat very badly, and,
yes,
I'm not particularly surprised by that. I had a discussion with somebody the other day in which they said, well, what was the Post-Dispatch's endorsement record this year? And I said, we don't keep track of such things. We don't endorse to help candidates win. We don't endorse to help other candidates lose. We don't endorse to keep score like some politicians do. We endorse to give our readers important information about the voting booth, to encourage them to vote, and hopefully bring a little bit high-minded education to the voting process. That's why we get involved in that process. But back to your original question about
yes.
Are we liberal, are we conservative, what is our focus? Read the platform, and that's what I ask readers to do. It's at the top of our page every day, and it talks about what the values are that this editorial page endorses, and we will frequently in editorials talk about those values. And some of those values, based on where the two parties stack up right now, are going to make it very hard for the Post-Dispatch to endorse Republican candidates. It's not because...
What is it that you see in the Democrats or the Republicans that make you say that?
The Republicans have become so focused on, we will absolutely never raise taxes no matter what. It doesn't matter what the logic says. It doesn't matter what it does to the poor. It doesn't matter what it does to senior citizens. It is what I would consider an extreme position. I've been following, for instance, the debate over the Simpson-Bowles budget deficit reduction plan, mm-hmm. which I find to be a very reasonable plan, which I find to be something that speaks to probably the majority of Americans in the country, in which we're going to have to make some cuts to entitlements and some cuts to middle-class taxes that people like me benefit from. We're going to have to raise some taxes on the wealthiest 1%, maybe even more than just the wealthiest 1%, in order to bring some revenue in. We're going to have to cut some of those tax loopholes that corporations and big oil and the corn growers and various people benefit from. We're going to have to all take a little bit of a hit here in order to make this thing work. And right now, we don't seem to have a political system that lets us do that. And part of what we want to do on the editorial page is bring both of the parties back to the middle a little bit and say, hey, let's find a way to do what's best for the nation. Let's not do just what Mitch McConnell said and spend the next 4 years trying to defeat the president. That's not what American democracy has traditionally been about. And so that's why you have seen on our page pretty consistently us pushing back against that kind of approach, because we need to have two strong parties that complement each other, that push each other to be better. And right now, I don't see that in this country's political process. I see two parties trying to destroy each other, and I just don't think that's good for democracy.
Well, sometimes there are those who say that the editorial page is a little bit too harsh. One example that was brought to my attention, and I saw this when it came out, was that you had a series of state reps, all Republicans, on the editorial page. This is the blind issue. Mm-hmm. And you identified these, I think it was 3 different state reps.
Yeah.
Now, I checked into this to find out, what the heck was all this about. And And I'm not quite sure from the Post point of view why they were so strong on this, but what I saw was that there was an attempt to find money to be taken out of the budget to see if they couldn't reduce the Missouri budget, that there was already an established fund, I mean like a tax, that goes to the blind, so everybody gets like $700 if you're blind, even if you're legally blind, that the other money was coming out of the general fund, and that they couldn't justify why just blind were getting this money when there was a whole host of other folks, I mean like MR people or you know what I'm talking about, that there are many others who weren't getting any money out of the Treasury, and so that the idea was, well, let's just take this out. They're already getting money from an established tax fund.
Here's the problem, and this is why we were so harsh on it. The Republicans making that argument, and they lost. The money for the blind was put back into the budget.
I saw that.
Yes.
By the Senate, wasn't it?
By the Senate.
Yes.
The reason we got so strong in our criticism of and named names as it relates to that particular issue is because they didn't make any of those arguments until after they cut the money. What happened was this. In a budget hearing, they have a series of budget hearings, and this was in Missouri for your Illinois listeners who don't always follow Missouri politics.
And the YouTube ones.
And the YouTube ones. But there are a series of budget hearings in which most controversial discussions are handled in the public during the House budget process. And if you're going to cut money from the blind, you deserve to let the blind know, we're about to take some of your health care away. Why don't you come in so we can talk about it? But instead, because they knew how controversial it was going to be, and because they were trying to set up a battle with Jay Nixon, this was all politics, when they had the hearing in which that money was coming out, one of the Democrats on the committee recognized what was going on. They knew the line item and saw, wait a minute, you're taking money from the blind. Can we talk about this? And the chairman wouldn't even let the Democrats talk about the issue. So they took the money out in a hearing without the blind knowing about it, without anybody being able to come up and speak about it, and without any Republican making the arguments that they made after we wrote our editorial criticizing them. The reason we specifically called out some St. Louis Republicans is because they're actually pretty reasonable people, and they let it happen. And this is because of partisan politics. This is what's wrong with politics in America. This should not be a Democrat-Republican thing every single time. Those Republicans should have stood up with their St. Louis Democrat colleagues and said, wait a minute, let's have the debate. Let's have the discussion. If we think that we need to pull this blind money out in order to be fair to other disabled people, which was the argument they came up with afterwards, or in order to put money back into higher education, which I agree with them on as it relates to setting some priorities, then let's have the discussion. And all too often what happens in the legislative process is when lawmakers know that something's going to be controversial and it's going to be hard and they're going to get beat up on it, they try to sneak it through. And I am constantly vigilant of that sort of thing. That was offensive to voters. It should be offensive to conservatives who have no problem defending cutting spending for a variety of reasons. Set the priorities, determine which priorities are most important, and then make your decision. But do it in open government, do it in the public. And that didn't happen in the blind case, and that's why we came down so hard.
I see. Well, you make good points there. By the way, remember I told you that when we hit the 5-minute mark, you're going to be shocked?
Yep.
We're there.
Okay.
We've actually passed it already. So at this point, I always say to my guests, if there's anything that we haven't talked about so far that you wanted to put out there, this is an opportunity. Is there anything that you wanted to get into that I haven't asked you about?
Well, here's just one of the things I would say to readers. The editorial page is the one place in the newspaper, always has been, continues to be, and will continue to be online as we move into this digital age. And we're on Facebook now. People can find us at PD Platform on Facebook, and you can find me on Twitter at Tony Mess. we're the page where we communicate with readers. We have conservative writers every day who write us letters to the editor whose opinions are on our page right next to the editorials. We have liberals who write in who don't think we're liberal enough sometimes, or who write in response to the conservative writers. The editorial page is your page. It's a place for the readers to engage on these issues. And unlike so much of what you see out there in the political discussion today, it's a really vibrant discussion. And it's a really thoughtful discussion on the letters page. And I love that part of what we do. I interact with readers all day long in my job, including people that call about things that have nothing to do with the editorial page because my name's in the paper. But that's what's so great about the opinion page, and that's one of the things that I would just say to readers who sometimes read something that they disagree with. Well, that's great. Disagree with us, now hold us accountable. Send us a letter to the editor and tell us what your view is and educate us, because I read every single letter to the editor. And sometimes they call to question the logic that we use in an editorial, and I don't always agree with it, but that's how we inform each other, is we share these different opinions. And I would just encourage people, use that opinion page as your access to the political conversation.
Circulation is not what it was once upon a time.
No, it's not.
Not just the Post-Dispatch. I mean, we're talking about, from the New York Times all
Right.
the way down to the something picayune in some small town. Why do you think that is? Are people just too stupid to read? Or have they just changed and they're reading something else?
I think that the internet has a big part to do with that, and we're sort of changing the way we view circulation in terms of trying to capture our internet readers. You talk about YouTube, the videos that we have online at stltoday.com and the different, we try to reach readers on the iPad, on their cell phones and their smartphones, and on the internet, and doing all these different things now. So I think we're reaching readers in a different way. I wish our print circulation was up higher, because our print product is still the most comprehensive news report you can find in the St. Louis region. And if you want to know what's going on in your community, you ought to be reading the print product of the Post-Dispatch. But you can get to us online, and you can get to us on your iPad and your iPhone and all of that stuff too. So circulation is changing. And we haven't figured it out. The newspapers rushed into the internet, and we gave everything away on the internet. And to some degree, a lot of people in the industry believe that we devalued or undervalued our print product when we did that. And now you're seeing a trend where newspapers are trying to grab that ownership back.
They want to charge,
and they're putting in
internet.
paywalls and charging for the internet. And some newspapers are having some success with this, others aren't. I don't know what the future is as it relates to what the model is, but it's good that the industry is trying a variety of different things, because that circulation matters, because we have to get it high enough so that we're having the sort of influence that we can change the political discussion.
Boy, I wish we had more time, and we'll have to have you back another time if you're
Be
willing
glad
to continue this conversation. Thank you very much for being with us today. And I've been speaking with Tony Messenger. He is the editorial page editor of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. We've had a pretty good discussion here. Hopefully you'll learn something about that paper. Thank you very much for being with us. See you next time.